right, sweet. We're live. That's great. So we are finally back. We are finally back working on Star-Lord's mask. For those of you who don't know, this is a collaboration that I have been working on with Urban Props. I've got a link to his Facebook down below in the description because he has allowed me use of what I think is truly the most beautiful Pepagura Star-Lord model I've ever encountered. And I was able to whip up some templates for that, and as soon as this build is done, we're going to be releasing those templates, so the further I get in these live streams, the better it is for y'all. So last time we met, good evening, Melvin. Last time we met, we went through and we did all of the 8 to 10 millimeter parts that we were going to need some extra thickness on, and the only one we actually got through detailing was one of the ears, but since then I have gone through and done the other ear, so you can see these both have a very nice bevel to them, and this nice detail line that just sort of runs through them. Then those also meet up with these pieces, which I can tell you from personal experience were an absolute bear to make, but they look really sharp. These meet up with that just like this, and you can see the line sort of continues through there, and there's a bunch of very, very fine, small details in there that are going to be really fun to paint up. And these lines will also help us tape off more easily to do more of a masking and spray style paint job on this, which is going to be really, really fun. So we've got those. So those are the two cheek pieces, got the two ear pieces, and then we also did the back plate, which is sort of the keystone piece of the back of the helmet, and it's just got a nice round to it. Very simple but the thickness is really going to be useful for that. And then these two pieces, so this is sort of the grill of the mouth, which has a bunch, and I mean a bunch, of really sharp detail lines to it, and of course some undercuts on the inside, so you get that sort of soft angle right along the midsection there on the bridge. And then under that, this sort of slots into that there. And the extra thickness was just really nice that I could sand in that groove. And that's all the pieces that we're going to be making out of this sort of 8 to 10 millimeter thickness. It's the only thing that we're going to need that much thickness for. The rest of this was always going to be made out of 6 millimeter pieces and 2 millimeter pieces. Now, it is worth noting that I'm going to do my best in this build guide to fully explain how I put together each of these different parts. Because some of them are more complicated than others, it's true. And it's a little less intuitive than some of my last builds. Even Daredevil, I think, sort of came together in a way that all the pieces look like they belong where they belong. Whereas this one is going to be a little more complicated. Like, for instance, this brow piece here. This brow piece has an undercut, another undercut, and then these lines are all for layered pieces that are going to be additional 2 millimeter pieces that we slap on top of there. And that just means that there's no real good way to indicate that on here. It just happens to be one piece that I'll be putting together. So we're going to do our best to kind of walk ourselves through that. And so what that means is some of these pieces these are all 6 millimeter pieces, but some of them have 2 millimeter pieces that will be cut out of them and cut out of 2 millimeter after I cut out the 6 millimeter pieces. So to that end, what we're going to do is we're going to move the purely 2 millimeter pieces aside, and then we are going to trace out the 6 millimeter parts first. Now I'm also going to put these to another side, different pile, and I'm going to bust out this roll of 6 millimeter foam from SKS Props. We have a roll of HD. Whoops. Here we go. Uh-oh. My cord is stuck. That's not good. Uh-oh. Power cord is stuck. There we go. Perfect. So we're just going to kind of thread this down here so that I have a more even working surface. Oh god. Now the mic cord is stuck. There we go. Okay. now that I've completely derailed this live stream, it's very important that I talk a little bit about this foam, because this is something that I have had, honestly, just the absolute, what in the hell? This stuff is made for foam crafters rather than some of the other foams that I've used in the past. You know, whether they be mats or what have you, that were essentially things that we were Can you hear me now? Hang on. Can you hear me now, Melvin? Oh gosh, I hope so. There's a little bit of time delay between me actually asking. Sweet. Sorry, one of the things I really do love about the fact that this marks so cleanly is that when you have little teeny tiny edges, so this doesn't actually meet at a point right here. It meets at a very tiny flat edge, which is regrettably technically accurate, so I'll be keeping it. You can actually pretty clearly see that, whereas with some cheaper foams, it might sort of smudge together into a single point. So, let's see, then this can actually, if I were to do that, that'll actually work out really well. Sweet. There we go. I always try to make sure that I'm using my material to the best of my abilities. I don't like to waste material unduly. Which is not to say that I don't make pieces as, shall we say, as uncomplicatedly as possible. I just really like to make sure that I'm utilizing the pieces as much. It does lead me to hold on to a fair bit of scrap, but I will say I do wind up using most of that scrap. And sometimes you have really fun projects that utilize that scrap, like, Sokka's boomerang and Amon's mask especially are great projects for utilizing scrap material because the pieces aren't that large, but they are kind of oddly shaped, so they get to use some of those parts that maybe look a little funky when you offcut them, but it's so much material you don't want to get rid of it. There we go. There's the second eye cup traced out. Sweet, we are breezing through this. These next couple pieces, I'm actually going to need to leave a little bit more space for myself because these are intentionally flat so that I can flip them over along this line. So, without further ado, let's do just that. This can go, whoops, this can go right here. Now, I know some people who like to put these things together in a way where they essentially pin everything down and then trace it. I've also seen people pin things down and then lightly mist their foam with like a black spray paint so that it just sort of outlines all their pieces parts. And those aren't bad options. I think that paint might have a subtle effect that you might not like, which is essentially you wind up adding a slight texture to your foam, and anywhere that stays accidentally will be very visible, and I think that might not be ideal, but overall I've seen it work very effectively. Quick side note, when I do this, when I try to save paper and time in cutting out templates by making only half the template and I need to flip it, what I'll do sometimes is I'll go just at the corners and I will mark just where the corners line up and then line that up over here. And this does two things. First, it makes sure that I am actually lining up everything where it's meant to go, but it also has an added bonus. It has the added effect of leaving me with a very, very sharp center line that I can use to help line up pieces later on, especially since the piece right above it is also flipped over in just that same way. Here we go. Awesome. Now if I go around over here, I actually need to pull the foam back a little. I threaded it a little too far down. There we go. Sweet. So now when I go through, I've got one piece that is basically the entire lower back of the helmet that is just symmetrical all the way through, which is great. And I can do the same for the piece right above it, which sort of slots in up here, but you can see the angles don't quite meet up. To that end, I'm actually just going to do that down here. Now this piece especially has a lot of vertical lines running through it, and the reason for that is because we are going to use those vertical lines as guides for lots and lots of 2mm pieces, which I am very excited about because this is far more accurate than my last helmet. And for those of you who've been on this stream before, This is actually me redoing a build that I've done in the past. I've gone through and I'm working with a much more exciting 3D model, a model that I am very excited about personally. It also happens to be much more accurate insofar as we now know what a lot of the detailed portions of the helmet look like, because James Gunn is a straight up G who loves cosplayers making the stuff from his movies. So you wind up with a lot more reference pictures as time goes on. This is really close there, so I'm going to have to be careful cutting that out because that is meeting at like the perfect point. This is the front, one of the fronts of the rebreather pieces. We're just going to go through and trace it out real fast. Nothing terribly complicated going on. It does have more details that I will be adding in after I cut it out. So I don't want to like throw away my templates once I've traced them out. But it is worth noting that you don't have to trace out every detail all at once now, especially since if for some reason while you're cutting you mess something up, you don't have to retrace all that stuff. So it's kind of hedging your bets against yourself accidentally messing up, but like whatever. Do what you gotta do. There we go. There we go. Oh, so I'm very excited to announce a little bit of personal business. I'm going to be moving pretty soon here. We are going to get into a much nicer space for these live streams, and these build videos are going to be able to get some more entertaining shots. But more than that, we're going to be able to do things like more of the gluing and assembly live streams that I really like doing because I think they help a lot of people out trying to do very specific joins and trying to follow along. But it's just gotten too dark too early, so I can't do them outside anymore. Not to mention it's cold as all hell outside right now. You know, because of how cold hell traditionally is. There we go. Trace out the mask piece. Sweet. There we go. Trace that out here. This out there. And with that, the only piece I have left here is actually something that I had not cut out yet because I wasn't sure how I want to do it. And the more I think about it, the more I think I want to do it this way I'd originally intended, which is I have the 2 rings of the eye and then I have a lens piece. And what I'll probably do is not use that lens piece. I will probably cut a single large piece of acrylic to go behind these eyes. But then this eyepiece I will cut out of a single piece of 6mm foam. And I hadn't cut that out because I wasn't sure if I was going to get, like, I don't know, a piece of PVC and use that as the basis for this. And frankly, me cutting this out does not preclude the possibility of me doing it that way still. I might still go back on my word and assemble just a piece of PVC into this helmet. And the reason I do this is because I actually really want the shape of the eye not to be dictated by the flex of the cup of the eye. I want it to be dictated by the actual opening of the eye. And so if I can get that out of foam, I will try to get that out of foam. But if I can't, what I'll try to do is essentially find a piece of PVC that's, gosh, how big is this? This eyepiece is like, it's like 1 7/8 inches across. So I'd probably find a piece of PVC that was either like 1 3/4 inches or 2 inches and just sand it down gently. And just take two very small pieces of that and use that as the guide. Because you can glue foam to PVC and vice versa very easily. It's extremely palatable, if you will. Foam PVC and wood all tend to play really well together. Just as a side note, for anybody who's like me and uses little greebles and things to try and flesh out their builds, it's nice because if you have different materials that sort of paint up the same way, they don't end up looking very strange next to each other, and that's really important when you're trying to make a cohesive build. Like, all of this together is going to more or less have to look like metal by the time I'm done. Let's see here. This is the left eye, and that is the right eye. The rest of these are distinctive enough, I don't feel the need to label whether they're the left or the right. So, without further ado, we can cut this out. I am actually going to take a pair of shears real quick and just cut off the excess so that I have a single piece that's not part of the roll that I'm manipulating, because otherwise I tend to get really frustrated. So I've got this piece here, which is more than big enough to keep. I'll just set it over there. And then I got to cut around. I'm cutting a little wide, you know, it does waste a little material to do it this way. But the trade-off is that you can actually hold on to the piece while you're cutting it, and you can sort of twist it around if you need to. You know, you're not gonna get stuck. Ah, there we go. Okay. Let's get rid of this. See if I can, hold on, mute. Please stand by. There we go. Awesome. Well, so now we're left with this piece here, which looks a little funky, but of course it's got everything on it. I am actually going to bust out my X-Acto blade first and foremost here, because this stuff, well, it is some of the nicest foam I've worked with and finished up in the past. This stuff is really difficult to cut, I find, compared to a lot of other store brand foams, like Michael's Art Minds brand. It's a lot softer, and sure, because it's a lot softer, it can be a little more difficult to finish up. But I will say, I made my Dr. Doom Fortnite mask out of Michael's Art Minds foam, and that thing turned out spectacular. So I'm not disparaging that stuff by any means. Let's start with the largest piece over here. These are all going to be flat cuts around the bottom and the sides here, where they either meet another piece or the open air. Here we go. There we go. I'm just going to ease that right across, trying to keep a nice straight 90-degree angle all the way across. And I'll separate it from the rest of the piece right now. Again, it's the same thing where I can like manipulate this a little easier. There we go. Hold on. That cut is a lot cleaner than something I might have got out of other foam. But of course, a sharp blade is usually all you need to go a really long way with it. All right. Let's see. It's a little bit of an angle there. I'm going to cut here. Note that I usually sort of dive into the foam forward and then pull back. If I can't do that, what I'll do is sometimes I'll sort of saw it into the place so that I'm not overcutting. You can still get a very, very clean cut that way. All right. Yeah, all of these are going to be draw cuts that we slowly pull toward a corner. We don't want to overcut into that corner, so what I'm going to do is actually sort of lift it up and just gently pull toward the corner. And then the other cut, which is admittedly a lot smaller in this case, I'm going to just sort of saw the blade into place And then do the same thing. I pick it up and I gently saw back to the corner until I cut all the way through and the corner's cut. Just like that. That's the same thing I'm going to do along all of these cuts. Here we go. Awesome. This is a rounded edge here, so that should all sort of be one piece. I think rather than trying to keep my knife super vertical and go around that corner, I'm actually going to cut it in two pieces. So I'm going to cut square across here, and then I'm going to cut square to this corner edge, and that'll leave a little bit of a flat corner there where there should be a rounded edge. And that's okay for now, because what I'll do is I'll go in while I'm detailing all the pieces, and what I'll do there is just take my rotary tool and I'll just knock that down. I'll just knock that down and round it out. And in that way, it becomes the rounded edge, regardless of how I wound up cutting this anyway. So, besides, I've got a little bit of detailing to do along this edge. I'm going to do a very, very fine bevel. So I was going to need to go along this piece anyways. Here we go. Sometimes it takes a couple of passes. There we go. Again, gingerly sawing down to that corner. And we go along this edge here. Sweet. If you're ever in doubt about whether or not you're keeping your blade at a 90-degree angle, honestly, practice makes perfect. But what I've found is if I make a conscious effort to be slightly outside of 90 degree, almost winging it out slightly, I usually wind up with something closer to 90 degree than I thought I was going to. Now, this piece also brings up another interesting question about cutting really sharp interior angles, because of course these two angles right here and there I can both pull into from well outside the piece, but now I've got interior angles where at least one side meets another interior angle. So to do that, we're going to need to be even more careful because we want to avoid having to redo a lot of this after the fact. So you make the first cut, which comes from outside the piece. Again, 90-degree angles all around. And we are just going to pull that down to here until we meet the corner, and again, gently saw in. Now for this one, I'm going to try and be as clear as possible here. I'm going to start at the corner where this other angle starts, and I'm going to immediately pull away from it so that as I'm cutting, one side of this is dipped all the way down through the material, whereas this cut is extremely shallow and it just sort of dips all the way down by the time we get to here. And what that'll mean is we can get to this corner here, we can saw through, we can make sure that everything's meeting up properly, and we're left with a very sharp angle here. It's pretty clean, but now we've got essentially an open edge and an open edge. And sure, is it perfect? Nah, but it's really, really, really close. It's going to get covered in no less than 5 layers of sealant. So I'm not super concerned about that. It's about as clean as we could have hoped it would be. And that's really the important thing. There we go. And then, of course, we just draw a cut against where we just cut, being sure to follow our own lines. We want to avoid sort of ripping and tearing pieces out. We always want the last pull away from the material to be a cut. One of the reasons this method isn't perfect is you can see, let's see if I can get it to zoom in. Right here, there is just a little bit of a winged edge where you can see the two different cuts didn't quite line up. That's okay, especially given that This edge is going to essentially be covered up by a piece like that, just ever so slightly dipped down. So it's going to get covered up, but let's say it wasn't. Let's say that was an open edge just to the edge of the piece. You know, that wouldn't be as ideal. We try to sand it down. It's unideal. It's unideal, and I do try to avoid mistakes in the cutting process because I do think that they bleed into the rest of the piece. I am not ashamed to admit that on my most recent build, the Daredevil build, I actually did redo an entire piece. Let me see, is it still over here? Oh, I must have gotten rid of it. But what I had done is I had actually attempted to make the ear cup in a different way. For those of you who haven't watched the video yet, I do recommend going to see it. I think it turned out really, really nice. What I did is I actually cut out the centerpiece, pushed it in, and then beveled the outer edge with my Dremel and then glued them back together. But originally I was just going to sand it in, and that was it was a mess. It was a hot mess that did not look anything like what it was supposed to. And so I just recut it. I just completely recut that piece because it's not worth trying to make it work, especially given that foam's pretty darn cheap. Foam's pretty darn cheap, and it's not worth trying to salvage a piece that just looks bad, frankly. Here we go. Cut across there. Cut up that. And I'm going to be a little messy here and cut down from the interior corner. Just to show you guys what happened. So when you do it that way, when you sort of cut in and out, rather than pulling in and sort of sawing in, you're left with a little divot down in the corner. Now that's not going to be super important for that corner here because this is actually going to meet another piece, so you won't see that. But if I was to meet another piece, you would but if I wasn't to meet another piece there, you would definitely see that. And to that end, I'm just going to go like this. Go. Super simple. Saw that into place, pull back, and separated. Perfect. That's cutting out just the back piece there. And this is super therapeutic for me. I don't know about you folks. Going through and cutting these pieces out, it's an exercise in patience, but if you do it right, it looks truly so beautiful. I'm going to cut this piece out next real quick, because A, it fits into there, and I really want to show you guys that, and B, it is also just perfectly touching this other piece, so I want to cut this out first so that I don't mess up that other piece. So, set that aside, and then ever so simply cut this out in basically the same way we cut out the other piece. This is basically just a smaller version of that other piece. But the way it fits together, and the way that it will force the curves together, it has to be its own piece, and it just gets to be cut along its own seam. There we go. Oh, this is perfect, because now this piece is also sort of nestled inside the groove of that. Set this aside again. Awesome. We cut across here. This again is a flat edge that will just be to the open air. And then this curve, I do feel confident being able to go around with my knife. When you get tight curves like this, you really want to make sure your knife is as vertical as possible, not just at a 90-degree angle this way, that way, but also this way, because you want your leading edge, the very tip of your knife, to be able to make very, very tight corners. So we're going to go around here, and keeping this as vertical as as 90 degree as possible with the table, we are going to just sort of run around the piece like this, keeping a nice even pressure the whole time. Here we go. There we go. And in one fell swoop, that whole piece cut out. Awesome. It cuts pretty cleanly, even if it is a little bit harder to cut. Now I really wanted to show off cutting out this piece, because this piece goes together a little hinky. So there are pieces that are going to glue on top of it. There's also a recess that's going to be cut out of the middle of it. But more importantly to us right now, this edge meets this edge, and this edge at a really intense angle. So to achieve that, rather than, say, gluing one inside the other or just gluing them face to face and creating a very round edge, what we will do is cut this at a very deep angle. Excuse me, this edge here at a very deep angle. So I tip my blade in, and rather than keeping it at a 90-degree angle, I'm going to cut in at about a 45-degree angle following my line. And I'm going to do the same thing along here. Again, sort of nosing the very point of my blade in, and then cutting at a deep 45-degree angle. Now, if you've ever cut angles into foam before, you'll know what I'm talking about when I say, if you think you're cutting a 45-degree angle, cut it at a slightly deeper angle, because you're not. You don't know what a 45-degree angle is. You think you know. You think you should just intuitively know, but you don't. There we go. I'm actually going to pull out my retractable blade for these next two cuts, just because I like to have a little bit more of the blade to work with, so I can kind of cut across all at once. There we go. Helps me keep straight lines. And you can see underneath what I'm talking about, where these edges now, when you press them together, meet at a very nice angle. It's very clean. It's very easy to do. And again, it saves you a lot of time. I know people who cut everything at a 90-degree angle and then go back through and do all the cuts, and I think that's just a waste of time. I think it's a huge waste of time, and waste of your time specifically. Like, you're just redoing all the work you've already done. There we go. These are all flat edges. 90 degrees here. Again, sharpening my blade as I go to make sure that all of these edges are nice and clean. There we go. Go. So there is a slight corner to that here, and so I'm going to cut these out sort of individually, side to side. And that's a little messy. Might have to clean that up with the rotary tool, but that's okay. And just straight across here. Perfect. And then once more, with feeling, we cut out the deep angles on the other side for symmetry, just like this. Be careful not to overcut, because of course you're going to run into the other piece there, and it's a little dangerous, but you do want to make sure that you fully cut these out, or you're going to have a heck of a time putting them together. There we go. And one more time. Nice deep groove. Now this, it's not as important if you cut all the way down to that, because all we're going to do is entirely glue these bits together. So when we push it together, it'll have a nice deep angle to it and create the sort of nubbin on the chin, which is great. It's exactly what we want it to do. All right, let's see what else we can get cut out before we end this live stream. Let's see, we could probably cut out the brow. Yeah, I say cut out the brow. That'll be super easy. Barely any inconvenience. That's not my thing. I can't take that. Oh, Father dear, and I ofttimes hear you speak of Erin's Isle, her lofty scenes, her valleys green, her mountains rude and wild. They say it is a lovely land, wherein the saints might dwell. So why did you abandon it? The reason to be told. Too low. Oh, son, I love my native land with energy and pride. Until a blight came o'er our crops, the sheep and cattle died. The rent and taxes were to pay, and I could not them redeem. And that's the cruel reason I left old Skibbereen. Your mother too, God rest her soul, lay on the snowy ground. Oh God, what's that line? Snowy ground. She fainted in her anguish at the desolation round. She never rose but passed away from life to mortal dream. She found a quiet grave, my boy, in dear old Skibbereen. And you were only 2 years old, and feeble was your frame. I could not leave you with my friends, for you bore your father's name. I wrapped you in a blanket at the dead of night unseen. I heaved a sigh and bade goodbye to dear old Skibbereen. Oh, father dear, the day may come when I'll answer call. All Irishmen of freedom stern will rally one and all. I'll be the man to lead the band beneath the flag of green. Then loud and clear we'll raise the cheer, revenge for Skibbereen. Boy, those were not the chill lo-fi hip-hop beats that we like to study to. There we go. Here we go. Sweet. This piece is almost cut out. It's got another one of those angles we were talking about where essentially we're going to have to cut in and then cut back again. But that's okay. We'll just keep these edges as flat as possible. And this should be pretty tidy. All right. Really like the way this is looking. I think that this is going to be kind of a funky sort of origami fold on this brow piece. But ultimately we're going to be left with a lot cleaner of a build. Do you want to request a song from me, Melvin? You have mentioned this before, but you never brought it up. You can request a song if you want to hear it. I'll probably not know it, but I'll try to learn it. LOL. Here we go. Let's see here. Okay, so I am actually not going to do any more work on this right now because we just want to get these cut out. I'm going to cut these out separately because I'm still not convinced this is the way I'm going to build the two eye circles. But the goggle sort of face piece of the mask is ready to be cut out. Yeah, I'm just going to keep kicking that can on a decision. You want me to sing Fly Me to the Moon? I know Fly Me to the Moon. Yeah. Fly me to the moon and let me play among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. In other words, hold my hand. In other words, baby, kiss me. Fill my heart with song and let me sing forevermore. You are all I long for, all I worship and adore. In other words, please be true. In other words, I love you. I really like Sinatra. I think that a lot of the Rat Pack had just some real solid voices, and I'm given to understand a great deal of the world feels the same way. Now, if you're ever interested in some really fun times on YouTube, or if you're just looking for some art, you should look up the Sinatra suite. Baryshnikov dance to a suite of Sinatra songs. And my fiance showed me it for the first time ever, and it's beautiful. It's a really good time. Honestly, if you clicked away from this to that, I would not blame you. It's beautiful. Let's see here. Sometimes these streams really do just evolve into me recommending things you should be watching other than me. Oh well. Awesome. I'm gonna cut these out. These are all flat angles. There we go. Oh, I didn't quite cut through there. There we go. That's not as clean as I would have liked it to be. That's okay though. Similar to the cut I made on this piece where I left that very round corner undone, I'm gonna do sort of the same thing up here. I'm just cutting slightly shy so that when I go back to sand that edge down, I don't sand too far into the piece and affect the overall fit. Ooh. Oh no! Alright, I might be calling the session here first, because usually when I'm starting to encounter this, it's because I'm starting to slip up a bit more. I started ripping this edge along this cut, and that's just my bad. So we might call it here, because this is going to require more work than just leaving it for now. Thanks so much for everybody who joined us today. It's been really fun. Got to sing some songs. If you really like these builds, please subscribe. If you want to support me, you can support me over on Patreon. I'm also available to chat about the builds over on Facebook on my page, Foamarmory. Want to give a huge shout out to our patrons. We got 4 now. You guys are just my absolute little fan club there. We really appreciate you. So for now, I've been Jaden for Foamarmory. Thanks so much. Go check out the Daredevil vid. Good night.